Okay, let's get into it. There's a lot to be done. Okay, folks, I'd like to start out and say we are living in spectacular times. Why do I say that? I don't know if you've been following my videos. We've been doing a lot of videos about the red heifer. I've been reporting on the red heifer for 7 years on Israel 365. And in the last week, there's been more advance in that than I've seen in 7 years. Yesterday afternoon, the Temple Institute announced that they had found a kosher Kohen, which is not a simple thing, to perform the red heifer ceremony. Using that as a prelude to just say the basis of the Jewish holidays was in the temple. Sometimes that gets confused. For example, we count the Omer after Passover. We count the Omer 7 full weeks. We count it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then the Omer. And when they get to the end, what is supposed to happen is we're supposed to make the sacrifice of 2 breads in the temple, but everyone says, oh, no, it has to do with the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai. No, it has to do with the temple. The holidays are based in the temple. That's why I'm learning them. I apologize if there are people who aren't as based in the temple. I think it's hugely important, especially in our days when the temple is about to come back into the world, or at least the temple service and parts of the temple service. So that's why I'm covering this. And also because if you have a Seder night at your home, we didn't invent it. The Seder night that we do today or next week, in 2 weeks, is actually what was done after the sacrifice in the temple. They would sacrifice the Paschal Lamb, and it wasn't a sacrifice that was burned. It was a Thanksgiving sacrifice. They would take the little lammy or sheepy back home, and they would have a Thanksgiving meal. That's, I think, the basis of the Thanksgiving that they have in America is the original Passover Seder, when you went to the temple and you brought the sacrifice home and ate it. So it's a Thanksgiving meal based around the Passover offering. So we're learning about the Passover offering today. I'm afraid, I'm deeply concerned that not everyone finds the temple quite as fascinating as I do, even though, God willing, we're about to see it very soon, and I am not kidding or exaggerating. It is coming at us at like a freight train, with God sitting in the cab, beeping the horn, tooting the horn. We're blessed to live in incredibly special times. So we might very well see the return of the Passover offering. But if there's something that you'd prefer to learn about, I'm totally open. I'd love to talk about anything having to do with Torah or what we call Geulah, redemption. I'm not a huge expert. I'm just incredibly enthusiastic. So if you have suggestions, feel free. I'd like to recommend, we're coming up on Passover, and people don't understand Passover. It's a lot of work. So maybe we should spend some time on what the laws of Passover are, but that's not what we're doing today. What we're doing today is we're talking about the Passover offering. Just to emphasize how important it is, there are 2 mitzvahs, biblical commandments, that if you don't do them, you're required to do them. If you don't do them, you get the most severe punishment that's mandated by the Torah. It's called karet, which literally means cutting, and you'll be cut off from the community in a spiritual level. And there are only 2 of them that if you don't do them, you will be cut off. One of them is Brit Milah, circumcision, and the second one is the Passover offering, the Korban Pesach. If you don't do it, you will be cut off from the nation of Israel. I want to emphasize the word korban does not mean sacrifice. And a lot of sacrifices are not what we normally think of as sacrifices, in that they get burned on the altar. Korban literally means something that brings you closer to God. And that was the entire purpose of the temple. The Mishkan, the tabernacle, was literally, it means a dwelling place for God. God was dwelling amongst us. So that's how you come closer to God, is you go visit him at home and have a meal. And sometimes you bring him a meal. So that's the korban. The Mishkan, it's like the word for neighbor is shachen. God was our neighbor. God was our neighbor. We're not supposed to put God up on a pedestal and stay far away from him. We're supposed to come close to him. So the Korban Pesach, pardon me, is the perfect example of that. It's sitting down and having a Thanksgiving meal with God and your family. You can't leave out the family. And the Torah states explicitly in Exodus 12:24, you shall observe this thing for an ordinance to you and your sons forever. Okay, the Korban Pesach is so important. If you don't do it, you get a real bad thing. And we're required to do it forever. It's that important. And you say, well, should we bring it today? There's a very interesting thing about the Korban Pesach. Like I said, if you don't bring it, you get cut off from the nation of Israel, at least on a spiritual level. But there's a rule about the sacrifices that if there's a sacrifice, a public sacrifice that is time bound, then you can bring it even if you are ritually impure. And the Passover sacrifice is considered a public sacrifice because all of Israel showed up. All of Israel was in Jerusalem at the time to bring the sacrifice. And so it's a public sacrifice. So even if you are ritually impure, you're required, even today, we're required to bring the Korban Pesach. And if the majority of Israel was not ritually impure, then the people who were impure got to bring what's called Pesach Sheni, the second Pesach, one month later. That was learned out from the people who brought Nadav and Avihu. They went in to bring out the bodies of Nadav and Avihu just before Passover, and they became ritually impure. And they said, hey, wait a second, we want the Korban Pesach too. So they said, okay, we're not going to cut you out. You can bring it 1 month later. Also, it's a nationalistic holiday. Pesach is, of course, our holiday of freedom, where the nation of Israel is leaving to go back to the covenantal land of Israel, where God said, we will be as his people in the covenant. In the Bible, what we call Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki, an 11th century French Torah scholar, he said that the Jewish return to Israel and the end of exile will not be complete until the Passover sacrifice is reinstated in its proper place and at its proper time. So that will be the true end of the exile when we start doing the Korban Pesach again. Yeah, there was one other thing I wanted to say that, oh yeah, there's so much to say, and I keep getting it all mixed up in my head. The final redemption, if you want to know what it looks like, look at Passover, look at the leaving of Egypt. That is the template for all of the redemptions. There will be plagues, a replay of the plagues. There will be, and there are a lot of sources for that, there will be a splitting of the sea. There will be everything that you saw in Pesach will happen again in the final redemption. Okay. And when that happens, that will be the end of the exile, just like Passover is the end of slavery. So, according to Rashi, Passover was only performed once in the desert. Why? Because it's a national holiday. And even though we left Egypt, we hadn't entered the land yet. Passover is not really about ending slavery. It is really about serving God free in our country, in our covenantal land. So that's why Passover is, I think, the only time that we say Hallel. Hallel is a collection of Tehillim, of Psalms that we say normally during the day to commemorate special things. It's the only time we say it at night is on Passover, and we say it on the Seder because we're singing about our freedom. And it's so much freedom, it's so much redemption that even when we're packing our bags in Egypt, getting ready to leave, that is redemption. It's part of the redemption. I want to make one comment, and I apologize if this comes out a little strident. I mean, the fact that you're here listening to this means you're incredibly holy and have incredible intentions to serve Hashem. One thing I've noticed when Christians do a Leil Seder, a Seder night, is they talk about the Paschal Lamb as a sin offering. And that's inaccurate in a biblical sense. The Paschal Lamb, the Passover offering, was a Thanksgiving offering, which is why we're allowed to eat it. You don't eat a sin offering. So it's very important when you do this. I really request, your belief is your belief. I respect it. I even love it, and I've seen so much good come out of it recently. But when it comes to the Passover offering, it's a Thanksgiving offering. It's praising God, and God willing, we'll return it very soon. So that's, if I can get one message across tonight, that's the message. We're getting ready to bring a Thanksgiving offering. Okay. Okay, so how was it done? It was ritually slaughtered on the evening of Passover, just before Passover in the afternoon, and then it was taken home and it was eaten on the first night with bitter herbs and matzah, which we see on the Seder plate. And it's important to note that when I compare it to Thanksgiving, I think it's pretty accurate. Why? Because you cannot bring a Passover sacrifice by yourself. I'm going to say something, and Christians they'll be like, wait a second, I've heard that before. The way it was done is you had a minimum of 10, I believe it was a maximum of 20, and you all put in money, and you had to do this beforehand. You couldn't come at the last minute and say, oh, me too. You had to establish which group it was beforehand, and you sent one person to do the sacrifice in the temple. And that person was the representative for the whole group. And he would go in the afternoon, and he would go to the temple where they managed to get all of Israel into the temple in 3 groups. The first group would go in, the lamb could be sacrificed by a non-Kohen, but the collecting the blood and all of the other work that had to be done for that sacrifice had to be done by the Kohanim. And the Kohanim, they would line up 2 lines, one to go in and one to go out, and they would catch the blood in a golden container, and the container had a pointed bottom because they didn't want to put it down on the ground, because then the blood would clot, and it wouldn't be good. So they had to constantly swirl it, and they would hand it hand over hand from one Kohen to the next, all the way up to the altar, where they would splash it on the altar, and then they would hand it hand over hand all the way back to the beginning, where it would be used for the next lamb in line. And it was said, I believe it was Josephus, though it might have been a different historian, who said that it looked like 2 solid lines of gold because they were doing it so quickly. They would hand it hand over hand, up, throw it, all the way back. It was that fast. And while they were doing that, they would sing Hallel, which, as I said, is the collection of Psalms which we sing at the Passover Seder. And it's supposed to be entirely joyous. We're singing about our freedom, which a person who was a slave may not serve God. We know that from a Hebrew slave, an Eved Ivri. You have to be entirely free to serve God. So we're singing that we are finally free, able to serve God, because we are slaves to one. We are slaves to God. So that's what we're celebrating on Pesach. There was one Pesach that was unique in itself, and that was the Pesach that was done in Egypt. It was done the night before we left. We actually kept the sheep or the goats, it could be either, in our homes, and then on the night before we left, we did the Passover sacrifice in Egypt and did a Leil Seder. But that was also special in a couple different ways. It was specifically intended to stop disease, to stop makat bechot, to stop the plague of the firstborn. So that had an intent. You might want to have that intention while you're having your Leil Seder to realize that this was such a powerful thing that it stopped the angel of death. And in order to do that, the blood of the sacrifice was put on the lintels, not as as I said, not as a sin offering, but as a sign to keep the angel of death away. So Nisan is the first month of the year. According to the Bible, when you read in the Bible and they say the first month, second month, third month, they start counting on Passover. Okay.
We've got one question from Richard.
Sure.
Did each person in the group bring a lamb or one lamb for the group?
No. It's a communal offering. So one person was the designated driver, and he would bring the sacrifice for all of them, which might explain how they managed to get all of Israel into the temple in only 3 batches, because it wasn't all of Israel, it was all of the representatives of Israel, meaning 1 in 10. The designated person to go do that. It's interesting. There's certain halachas, certain laws pertaining to that. As I said, you have one person, he has to be, of course, at least bar mitzvah. And also the Passover offering can only be, the only people who can eat it are people from Israel. And though I have interesting opinions about that, maybe I'll get to later, maybe not. I don't want to get in too much trouble tonight. So it's one person, but you have to stay as a group. You have to establish your groupness before Passover, and even so much that if you're all sitting there and everyone falls asleep, well, that's the end of the group. You've just blown it. If one person stays awake, you're still a group. You have to consciously decide to be a group. So I have this weird habit on Leil Seder. You look around the table, because the people who are there with you, they're the people who Hashem intended to be there with you. It's a very special gathering. God said, you're going to be in this group. You're going to bring the korban, the bringing closer goat. So that it has to be a group. One representative brings one animal, and you only need a mouthful, a tiny little bit of the meat. You don't necessarily have to have a big meal of it, just a tiny bit with the bitter herbs and the matzah. It's interesting.
Another question too.
Sure.
Malki asks, how did people get the blood back to their lentils?
Because there was no temple at that time. That was only in Egypt. The painting of the doorpost was not done after Egypt. The blood was taken to the altar and sprinkled on the altar. In Egypt, there was no altar, so every house did it, and the lamb was right there. And they didn't have to take the blood to the Kohen. So that's how they got the blood to the doorpost. Did that answer the question? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay, where was I? it was, as I said, it was done once in Egypt, and once in the desert, and then it was done in the land of Israel after that. That's as per Exodus 12:25, when you come into the land. So actually, it was not performed in the desert, and then the sacrifice was only performed in Egypt and then in Israel. And this was continued until the temples. That's so according to the Bible, when we talk about the Jewish feasts, as you call them, or as we call them, there are three of them. There's Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. We refer to them as the regalim, which jokingly it means it's kind of like a weird pronunciation of raglaim, of legs, because there's a mitzvah of aliyah beregel, going up during a regel actually means like a time period or time, a special time or a holiday. So the regalim are the holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. But that's when you had to go up to Jerusalem 3 times a year. The pilgrimages. These were 3 pilgrimage festivals. Pesach is also, it's usually the springtime, where I think you feel it more in Israel than in America. Israel has very extreme seasons. It goes, the difference between, there's the fall and spring last maybe a week. Okay, you go straight from winter to summer. So this is actually the spring festival, and that's very agricultural. All of these festivals, not only do they have temple meanings, but they have agricultural meanings. So Pesach is after the winter rains stop. And it generally does not rain in Israel between Pesach and Sukkot. As a result, in the Siddur, in the prayer book, Pesach is when we change the prayer. Until Pesach, it's considered winter, so we pray for rain because that's when it rains. After Pesach, we stop praying for rain, or during Pesach, we stop praying for rain because rain doesn't fall, and anyone who's a farmer knows that rain out of season is not a blessing. It's not a good thing. I remember when I was in kibbutz, they used to have wheat and alfalfa. I'm trying to translate in my head. I do agriculture in Hebrew, not so much in English. And they used to harvest it, and everyone who harvests wheat knows that you cut it and you let it dry out in the field, and then you make big bales out of it. So if you cut it, once it's cut and it's lying on the ground, if it rains, it can rot. So it's very important the rain comes in the season and not just rain whenever it comes. So that's one of the reasons why Pesach, we changed the prayer for rain. It's an agricultural festival, as well as, I mean, the temple was very agricultural based. Okay.
Another question from
Sure.
Malki. What about the Hebrews still in exile? Can they do it?
Can they? Ooh, that's an interesting question. First of all, that wasn't such of a question in the biblical or temple times, because what are you going to say? You're going to fly in from outside of Israel to the temple? Well, nowadays we can. There is a purification process that takes time, which is why we were learning about the red heifer not so long ago. I don't think you can't do, you obviously cannot do the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering, outside of Israel, because the only place Jews can bring sacrifices is on the Temple Mount. It was in the tabernacle, which was in the desert, and then in Shiloh for 369 years, and then it moved around a tiny bit. But then once David consecrated the Temple Mount, we were not allowed to bring sacrifices anywhere else. So if you're outside of Israel, you really cannot do any offerings at all, not even the Korban Pesach. You're kind of required to come up to the temple for the pilgrimage festivals. I will say I have very dear friends who are not Jewish who will bring home a little goat or lamb and make that for their dinner and have a Leil Seder. It's totally okay for non-Jews. It's not a Korban Pesach, it's not a Passover offering, but I appreciate their intent. I might be probably the only Orthodox Jew who thinks so, but but I think it's, you know, it's a beautiful intent to connect to
That's
to connect to the temple.
That's actually relevant in ways to this next question from Scott.
Sure.
Any examples from the Mishnah or Talmud of a foreigner participating in Passover during temple times, maybe celebrate the Chag but not eat of the Korban Pesach? What about a Ger Toshav, full converse? It says full conversation necessary,
No.
but I think he meant full conversion.
No, Ger Toshav, no. No, Ger Toshav is not a full conversion. Ger Toshav is not a conversion at all. It's
Yeah,
the
he's asking, is a full conversion necessary?
full conversion is necessary if you want to take part of the Passover offering. I have a question. Is there anyone here who's not Jewish, who is Jewish?
Well,
You're
I am.
Jewish. Okay, Benjamin. I'm going to say something that will get me in big trouble, and I apologize. I was learning once New Testament with some very dear Christian friends, and I'd never learned it before. And I was shocked that it opens up with Jesus doing the Seder in Jerusalem. I mean, he was an Orthodox Jew, so of course. So he sent, and it was amazing because a lot of Christians will say he didn't do the Seder, he didn't do the Passover offering, but he sent someone. And we said that's how we do it. So there's an interesting custom in the Leil Seder, which is you say Kol dechvin yetevicho, kol ditzrich yetev. Anyone who's hungry, come and eat. And there's a part in the Seder where you open up the door and you're supposed to bring in Eliyahu, but it's like, you know, your neighbors are the ones who are looking at you. And I realized you can't do that. You can't just open up your door and say, anyone who's hungry, come in. What about your non-Jewish neighbors? Can they come in and eat? And I had this kind of epiphany thing where I realized that what was actually happening was all of the people who were not part of Israel, who wanted to connect to Hashem, to the God of Israel. Well, I was inviting in an Orthodox Jew who came to Jerusalem to do the Leil Seder. And that's their connection to the Leil Seder. And you'll never hear any other rabbi say that, and I'll probably get in tons of trouble. But we're not supposed to open up the door and say, whoever's hungry, come and eat. That's wrong. So yeah. And just as an aside, and similar to that, one year I was writing an article about about Passover, and I asked the Temple Institute for an image for they have amazing images, amazing pictures, artists made of all these temple things, and I asked them about the send me a picture of the Leil Seder. So send me a picture of all these old houses in Jerusalem with people standing on the roofs. And I asked them, I'm like, what's that have to do with Pesach? And they said that there was a tradition in Jerusalem, since all of Israel was there, that at midnight, all of the Jews who were in Jerusalem would go up to the rooftop and sing Hallel together. And I started crying because I wanted to do that. I wanted to be that close to all the people who love Hashem. I wanted to be out on the rooftop singing Hallel with them. And that's really what Pesach is about, is coming together in love of Hashem and love of the land and the love of your fellow Jews. That's really pretty simply what it's about. So anyway.
I have another question here from Kim.
Sure.
I was told by my rabbi friend that the Seder was a tradition that's rabbinical from the 300s. What do you think?
No, like I said, the first Leil Seder was in Egypt. That was way before the 300s. And it was as soon as we came into the land, we started doing Seder. It's not rabbinical. I mean, we have the verses. It's straight up from the Torah telling us to do it forever. So it's not rabbinical, and it's way before the 300s. Okay, let's see if we can. Okay, so we said the animal, whether it was a lamb or goat, it had to be a male, 1 year old, and without blemish. Each family had one animal altogether. It was slain on the eve of Passover in the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan, after all the other sacrifices had been made, the tamid. If Pesach fell on Friday night, it was done a little bit earlier, but not by much. They really they did it very quickly. Okay.
Kim is updated also. She says now I think he meant the plate, so the Seder plate
Yeah, about what?
when it started
Oh,
using
the
the Seder
Seder
plate.
plate. The Seder plate might have been, but I was very surprised. You might want to learn the Mishnah of Psachim. I forget which chapter, but that pretty much describes the Seder night. The Seder night was actually what they did after the Pesach offering. It's what they did in Egypt. It's what they did in the temple. The Seder night is not um, a modern custom. It is what we did in the times of the temple. So, okay. When they went into the temple courtyard to do it, they blew a tekiah, trua tekiah on the shofar. Um, okay. Okay. Gosh, there's so much. The sheep, after you sacrificed it, you took it home and you roasted it whole on a long pomegranate branch. And it was served that way. And every person had to take a little bit. It's interesting, they do every year, and hopefully I'll take part in it. Every year they do temple reenactments. And they do a temple reenactment of the Passover offering, of the Korban Pesach. If they get the proper, if the government is feeling nice that year, they'll allow them to actually slaughter an animal. And I've never actually gotten a piece of meat, but oh my gosh, I just think about what it would be like to eat a piece of meat that was slaughtered by a Kohen for the sanctity of God. You know, everyone's like, even if I was a vegetarian, I would go crazy about that. It's such a high level. And one of the reasons they do these reenactments, they don't do it for show, is they're trying to figure out precisely how to do these sacrifices that were done all the time in the temple. And they've learned precisely how to put the sheep on the pomegranate branch and wrap it so that it cooks properly. It's not so simple, and it has to be relearned. It has to be eaten entirely that night. There's no, with leavened bread and bitter herbs. Anything that's left over has to be burned. You can't break any bones in it. And yeah, no leftovers. Okay. You can't eat it rare or boiled in water. No leftovers, no breaking of the bones, no, and a ger toshav, no. A ger toshav is not a convert. A ger toshav, even though a convert is referred to as a ger, a convert is a Jew in every respect. A ger toshav is an alien sojourner, and he did have some rights, some kind of function in the temple, but he was a person who had rejected idolatry, but had not converted to Judaism. And he lived in Israel, and he also accepted upon himself the 7 Noahide laws, including a rejection of idolatry. The feast was to be held in one house. It wasn't a movable feast, and you all stayed together for the whole night. Okay, we don't do the Korban Pesach today, even though we are required to. So instead, we have a symbolic reminder of the Korban Pesach on the Seder plate. It's what they call the zroah. The zroah is forearm. It's usually the leg of something, leg of a chicken, leg of a sheep. I've always tempted to get goat or lamb for Passover, and it comes with the leg. But you roast it and you put it on the Seder plate as zecher lekorban, as a memory of the korban, including the bitter herbs are also a memory. And
We have another question,
sure.
also from Malki. I heard that there's a priestly blessing if the left horn is left and not burned. Do you know where that might have come from?
Wow. I have never heard of that.
Me either.
I have never ever heard of that. I don't know if I'll have to look into that. That is intensely, yeah, it is very intense. I have never heard of that. It sounds fascinating. Yeah, Victor, I think Ger Tzaddik is a modern term. I don't think it's the original. A ger is a convert. Literally means someone who dwells. It comes from the word gar. Interestingly, Yaakov, when he came back, and Esav asked him where he'd been, he said, "Garti im Lavan." I dwelled with Lavan, and that
The word ger has changed over the historic Jewish writings. In other words, way it was used way back may be different than used today.
Right.
In fact, there's not
I'm a
much
big-
used today. Yeah.
I'm a big advocate for bringing back the concept of ger toshav. Ger toshav is the foreign dweller, and it appears in the Torah dozens of times, and we don't have it anymore, even though we should.
Well, we need the land. We need the ability for them to own the land, and since that's
Yeah.
that's not here anyway. So the giving
Well,
back of the land. So there's
I
no
think if there's a
way to do
person
it.
today who comes under the classification of ger toshav, I think he should be allowed to dwell in the land.
That would be nice.
Yeah, that's not connected to Passover so much. I'm a bit of an iconoclast. I break a lot of rules. I apologize. I hope I don't offend anyone. So yeah, so a ger toshav does not take part in the Passover offering. A ger, a full ger, a person who has converted to Judaism, does. So there's a big difference there.
Another question from Malki, is this a Jubilee year according to Jews?
The Jubilee is only counted when the Jubilee is 7 Shemitah cycles. It's only counted when all of Israel is in the land of Israel, or the majority of Israel is in the land of Israel. And right now, that's a dispute among certain rabbis. Even if it is, I don't know. This is not a Jubilee year. I believe 7 years ago was a Jubilee year. 1967 was a Jubilee year. I think 1948 was a Jubilee year. So I don't believe it is a Jubilee year. And even if it is, it's not officially recognized as Jubilee year because no one has said, okay, we're back in Israel, except the Sanhedrin. They said it a bunch of years ago, and I kind of like them. So, okay. Okay. Then I've heard some interesting things on top, that the Seder literally means order. And it basically means, okay, these are the things you have to do. And we're putting it in order for you so that you'll get it all right. It should be carried out in a somewhat orderly fashion, even though you're drinking 4 big cups of wine. There are 15 steps in the Seder to be done. And this is interesting. There are also 15 steps leading up to Solomon's temple. There are 15 chapters of Psalms that are read in Tehillim, which are I'm sorry, there are 15 Song of Ascents, which have to do with the stairs. And this is referring to the Levites as they climbed up those 15 steps. Okay, as I've been told also, there's a lot of the Seder plate has a lot of different meanings, a lot of traditions. One of the traditions is we put the hard-boiled egg as a kind of mourning that we don't bring the Korban Pesach anymore. Okay.
What I understand is that represents the second animal that would be brought for a larger group. Like if you have 15, you would have another goat or lamb,
Right. Yeah,
and
it's
that
also
represents that second animal.
It's a great way to get kids involved, is to teach them all these different meanings. There's so much to be said about the Leil Seder. You're going to be sitting there for a while, and if you can get the kids, I know it's this. To bring the more the better. To get as much meaning into it as possible. And if I can say one thing, another personal anecdote on the side, when I was in the Army, there was one year we did a really big, what they call a rotuv, which means literally wet, a live fire exercise. And it was the entire pluga. We were talking like over 100 guys. And we went down to this space in the Negev, big chunk of the desert. And we started out slow, shooting one bullet, then shooting with 3 guys, then shooting with 9 guys. And we built up to the final day where we had this huge field, and it was a valley. So there were hills at one side and hills at the other. And on the hills on the other side, they set up all these balloons and trenches to make it look like we had to conquer that. And we got all organized behind the other hill. And this was an intense live fire exercise. They had the belt fed, we call them mags. I think them crew fed machine guns. They're on top of the hill. And they had mortars. And mortars are really dangerous because you don't aim them. And they asked, is there anyone who can fire a mortar? And this one little Yemenite guy who was religious and had the curly past, and he's like, I do. And the officers were like, no, we need someone who's like a real fighter who can do this. And all the guys, he was new to the unit, and all his friends were like, no, him. And the officers were like, really? They're like, yeah. So he takes this mortar, and we're shooting live rounds. Okay, we're shooting live mortars. So we start running across this field, and there's a way you run in groups of 3. One guy run, 2 guys. One guy runs, 2 guys cover him, but you're doing that like 100 guys separated into groups of 3s. Everyone's doing that. They're shooting the mag over our heads. We're hearing the bullets like over our heads, and it's pretty freaky. Everyone's just trying to do their job and not get shot or shoot anyone else. And all of a sudden, we hear the mortars kick in. And this little Yemenite guy, God bless him, he was shooting 3/4 of a mile across this valley, hitting the balloons one at a time, 3/4 way, pop, pop, pop. I don't know how no one shoots a mortar like that. It was insane. And so we did the exercise, and I mean, we'd been running all day. It was rough. Afterwards, it's time to break out the coffee, and you always end up with a little sand in the bottom of the cup. But we were sitting down drinking coffee, and there was one guy in the unit. He was a cop, and he was anti-religious. You could tell. And he looked at the Yemenite guy, and he's like, so how do you know this Moses, the splitting of the sea, those crazy, how do you know it happened? And the little Yemenite guy looked up and he said, well, my father told me. And he wouldn't lie about that. And I saw my grandfather tell him. They wouldn't lie about that. And the guy had no answer. But that's really what we're doing on Passover. Passover is this unbroken chain of witnessing. And I remember my father was very ill at the end of his life. And I went out for Passover to spend what I knew would be my last Passover with him. And I was with my wife and my new baby. And I went out, and my dad said to me, I'm not feeling very good. Could you do the Seder? And I said to my dad, no, I came all the way from Israel for you to do the Seder. I want to learn from you to do the Seder. He said, I can't do it. He said, I'll tell you what. So I said, Dad, I'll do the Seder on one condition. It's for the sake of learning how to do it from you, to do this chain, to do this unbroken chain. He's like, okay. So I would be doing the Seder, and at that point I'd been in yeshiva a bunch of years, so I knew what I was doing. No one knows what they're doing. And every 5 minutes I looked over at my dad. Am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? He's like, yeah, you're doing it right. Keep going. It was fantastic. It was the last Seder I had with my father. And that was really the unbroken chain. And that's what you're there to do. If you do a Seder and you read every word and you do everything according to the law, and you didn't tell the story to your children in a way that I'm going to cry, that they know it happened, then you didn't do it. It's all about passing it on. It's all about passing it on. It's not a ritual. I think even in the times of the temple, that's what it was about. It was all about getting together and saying, yeah, we're here. Why are we here? Because God brought us out. And if he hadn't, we wouldn't be here. And making sure your kids know that. That's what, Purim, we just went through Purim. Everyone thinks, oh, parties, it's for the kids. No. That's an experience. You're actually doing something, and it's not for the kids. The parties and the carnivals, that's to get the kids out of the way. But Passover, it's all about passing it on to the kids. And that's what it's about. It's about telling the story. If you just tell the story, that's enough. Okay.
We have another couple of questions, but how are we on time? 'Cause I was thinking
we're fine. It's 10 of, and we have a tradition of going over. So,
okay. So, the first is from Caleb.
Oh yeah, Victor, absolutely. Yeah, I actually think that Passover could be a way for Christians and Jews to come together. Christians are permitted to take part in the Seder, and they were permitted to take part. The Gentiles were permitted to take part. I think, I could be wrong about this, but I don't remember reading any law that says that they were not permitted to sit at the meal. They were not permitted to eat from the Passover offering. But I'm pretty sure they were allowed.
They couldn't eat the actual lamb itself, but they were allowed at Seders.
Yeah, they get to come and eat the parsley and walk away hungry. No, I'm just kidding.
No, we always invited non-Jews, and we would specifically serve them the kishki, which would intimidate them. It was great.
Okay, so yeah, Christians are not permitted to eat the Passover offering, but they can go to the Seder, as Victor pointed out.
There's one more question from Caleb. It's my understanding the Sanhedrin is an acting Sanhedrin. Do we have a current Sanhedrin that is considered a source of halacha and authority?
No, we don't have an acting Sanhedrin. I used to be very close to the rabbis of the Sanhedrin. It kind of dissolved, especially after Rav Yoel Schwartz of blessed memory passed away. It's sorely missed. We need a Sanhedrin. Yeah, so we don't have a Sanhedrin now. We should have one soon. I should also warn that there is at least one organization that uses the name Sanhedrin in order to make money. So you have to be a little careful about that. I apologize. That's interesting, Malki. Yeshua said to do it in memory of him. Yeah, okay, so if you want to have Yeshua being the lamb,
they were all Jewish, though.
What?
They were all Jewish. They were all Jewish.
Well, first of all, yes, all of the people at
yeah.
the Last Supper were Jews, but also that emphasizes my point. It's not a sin offering. It's a Thanksgiving offering. And we know, I mean, it's very clearly a Thanksgiving. We know what we're thanking him for. So if you want to make Yeshua your gateway to the Thanksgiving offering, that could be very sweet, but just please not to a sin offering. You can still say that Jesus died for your sins if that's your Christian faith, fantastic. But I just feel like it damages what the Passover offering is. I don't know about the Catholics and circumcision. Circumcision, as I said, was one of the two positive commandments that if you don't do it, you get karet, you get cut off. The other one is Korban Pesach. There is some kind of implicit connection between circumcision and the Passover offering, though.
Can I
I'm not.
clarify?
Would you?
Yeah, I'm just referencing, like, for instance, I grew up Catholic. I was born a little boy, ringing the bell and giving the priest his wine and water and doing all that idolatry. So of course I was circumcised, as a young child. But that circumcision doesn't open the door to the Jewish world of eating the Passover. In other words,
Right.
I can
Right.
convert that there would be another circumcision, even though it's extremely minor. It's just a little
Right.
pinprick, if you
It's called
will.
hatifat. Right.
Right.
Circumcision is not conversion, but it is part of the conversion process.
What are the four? You got, when the temple's here, you have an offering, but you have mikvah, the circumcision, and one other thing.
Well, I mean,
I forget
Ruth
what the other
was
thing
much
is.
more simple. Conversion it's kind of like a modern incarnation. Okay, back to Passover. Let me see. I think I'm close to finishing up my notes. So if you come to Israel on Passover, there's something very special that happens. Twice a year on Sukkot and on Passover, during the intermediary days, what we call Chol Hamoed, there's a huge gathering at the Kotel, at the Western Wall. I'm talking huge. And we do the morning prayers, including Hallel, and then they do Birkat Kohanim, which is all of the priests, all of the Kohanim go to the front. Well, actually, first they go to the back where the Levites wash their hands, and then they go to the front and they bless all of Israel with the Kohanic blessing. And that's done on Passover, the intermediary days, once. Actually, they might do it twice. They did it twice last year. They started doing it twice during COVID so as not to get too crowded. But it's really spectacular. I mean, first of all, you have probably at least 100,000 people gathered at the Kotel. You have several hundred priests under their palaces blessing all of Israel. Actually, not on, and there's this custom that the fathers bring their children under their talus to be blessed by the Kohanim. It's very, very special. Very crowded. So if you don't like crowds, you might not enjoy it so much. But it happens on Passover. Also, I mentioned that in theory, since we are required to bring public time-bound sacrifices, even when we're ritually impure, that we are required to bring it today. There was actually an official ruling in 2022 by Rav Aryeh Stern, who was the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, and he ruled officially that that the Passover sacrifice is indeed incumbent upon the Jewish people now, even in the absence of a temple structure, even when we don't yet have the red heifer, which might change next week, to purify Israel. But the sacrifice can only be performed on the Temple Mount, and the only obstacle to performing it is the government's refusal to allow it to take place. And one sacrifice, and what's very unusual is that one sacrifice could be made at the Temple Mount in the name of the entire Jewish people. So that was an official ruling by the chief rabbi of Jerusalem. So I'm not saying something that's fringe craziness. And the altar has to be in the place, in the exact spot that the altar was in the temple, but it really is essentially just a pile of rocks. So that can be, we can just get a bunch of young guys together and put it together in 10 minutes, do the sacrifice, then take it down, and the next day no one would ever know we were there. Except someone would probably film it with their cell phone. So also, when you can see from this, the Korban Pesach is actually, it's a public offering, but it's also an individual offering. And that's why he was able to rule that, because it's incumbent upon the individuals, because we're required to acquire it with our own funds and we're required to eat from it as individuals, but it's considered a public offering. So therefore, one could be brought for all of Israel. Okay. Okay, ritual slaughters are permitted in Israel. The Shomronim, the Samaritans, do it on Mount Gerizim every year around Pesach when they think Pesach is, and the Arabs do quite a few. So it's not really a problem because of the sacrifice for us to do it this year. And every year, Jews try to bring. There are Jews who will try to bring a goat or lamb up to the Temple Mount, and the police are on the lookout every year to stop it. So we've never managed to have it yet, but a lot of guys are still trying, and the police don't want it to happen. I think that's just about it. Are there any more questions about Korban Pesach? Okay.
No, there aren't.
Okay. On the
It's just
10th
comments that
on
people
the
are
10th
talking
of
about.
Nisan, that's generally when the temple movements, the United Temple movements, do the reenactment. Usually it is a full dress. It's always full dress with the Kohanim dressed as Kohanim. I believe it's going to be in Mitzvah Yericho, where there's a full-size altar model set up, not an actual altar, but a model of the altar. They bring the silver horns that are meant for the service. If they do a sacrifice, they don't actually sprinkle the blood, but they do lay out the organs and show how it's done. As I said, the whole point is to relearn how to do it. They do roast it over a fire on a pomegranate branch, and if I'm lucky, I'll get a piece of meat. And this year, I am going to put a big effort into trying to attend and to do a live video. So if you follow us, hopefully you'll be able to watch a live reenactment of the Pesach offering. Usually they do it on the 10th of Nisan, which I'm not really sure. I put it in my calendar, not really sure when it comes out. But if I go and I have Facebook Lives, I'll be honest, I'm probably going to do some level of subscription for that. These trips are wonderful for me and my wife loves it, but it's a little costly for me because I have to stay over in Jerusalem. I apologize, but I'm really loving what I'm doing. I'm loving talking about the Korbanot. I'm loving how people are interested, something I absolutely didn't expect. So hopefully, okay. But hopefully I'll be attending the Korban Pesach reenactment and be able to do a live video from that. And of course, it will be the live video will be turned into a video that will then be posted for everyone to watch. And hopefully next year it won't be a reenactment. And if it's the real thing, I won't be able to videotape it. Sorry. You'll have to come for yourself. Okay, see it for yourself. Okay. And I wanted just to add, if I can, my email address. Can we put that up in the chat? Let me see. It's Eliyahu at wrestlingtheangel.com. If you have any questions, any concerns, any rants, more importantly, if there's some subject you'd like me to cover, please contact me. I'm usually pretty available. It's what's taken place of wasting time on video games and TikTok. So I like the connection. Let me know what you want to learn. I'll try to pick things that I think are interesting for you. But that's also, I'm thinking next week it would be important to cover the laws of Passover. Though if that's not interesting for you. Wow, Ralph. Wow. Russell, you enjoyed it? At least, at least no one's falling asleep. Okay. Thank you all so much. Be blessed. And I'll be posting this lesson as a video on our YouTube channel. So if there's something you wanted to review, it'll be up there. Okay? Are we cool to go, Suzanne? Suzanne?
Yep, I think that we are.
I think we're going. Yeah, no falling asleep. Okay, Kim, thank you so much. I have a feeling I get more out of this than you guys do. I really enjoy it so much. Okay, be blessed, y'all. Thank you so much. Okay, are we done?